The sky over New York was a heavy quilt of gray, swollen with dark clouds that had been threatening all day. By the time the workday ended, the heavens had opened, releasing torrents of rain that hammered the city with merciless persistence. The streets shone like black glass, reflecting the blurred colors of neon signs and the red glow of traffic lights. Car horns blared, umbrellas collided on crowded sidewalks, and everyone rushed to get home before the rain chilled them to the bone. Henry Wallace stood at the top of the steps outside his 20-story office building, staring down at the wet chaos. His chauffeur was already waiting beside the black limousine parked at the curb, umbrella poised to shelter his employer from even a single drop. Everything was in order, the way Henry liked it. At 60, Henry was the kind of man who carried his success like an armor. He was tall, silver-haired, and impeccably dressed in a custom charcoal suit that cost more than some family's monthly rent. His face was sharp, almost hawk-like, and his eyes, gray as the storm above, rarely betrayed emotion. People called him hard-nosed, ruthless, calculating. But no one could deny he was brilliant. The Wallace Tower behind him, his latest office building, stood as proof of his vision and iron discipline. Every square foot was leased to elite law firms, tech startups, and finance companies. It was his pride, his empire. And yet, even standing there in front of it, Henry felt a hollow tiredness creep into his chest. Another day of endless meetings, another pile of contracts that only meant more money, more numbers, more victories that no longer thrilled him. "Sir, shall we go?" the chauffeur asked politely, snapping Henry out of his thoughts. Henry nodded slightly and stepped forward, ready to slide into the safety of his warm car, when something caught his eye. At first, it was just a shape on the far edge of the sidewalk, near the stone wall of his building. Something slumped low against the gray concrete. His brows furrowed. Then, as a passing taxi's headlights illuminated the spot, the sight froze him. It wasn't just a shape. It was two people. An elderly man and woman sat huddled together on the drenched ground. The man's thin frame was bent, his back rounded like an old oak worn down by storms. He had taken off his own coat and wrapped it around the woman beside him, his trembling arms holding her close as though he could shield her from the downpour. The woman leaned heavily against him, her gray hair matted to her forehead, her frail hands clutching the lapels of the coat as she shivered violently. Henry's chest tightened. The woman coughed so deeply that it rattled her entire body. The sound cut through the roar of rain and traffic, sharp enough to draw stares from a few passers-by. But no one stopped. People just hurried past, adjusting their umbrellas, their faces tightening in discomfort. The doorman of the Wallace Tower shifted uncomfortably near Henry. Clearing his throat, he spoke in a low voice. "Mr. Wallace, they've been sitting there since early afternoon. I told them they couldn't stay, but they wouldn't leave. Said they had nowhere else to go. I thought security would handle it." But, his voice trailed off, thick with guilt. Henry remained silent, staring. His chauffeur coughed politely, mistaking his boss's pause as hesitation to step into the rain. "Your car is ready, sir," the driver said, lifting the umbrella higher, angling it perfectly to avoid a single raindrop touching Henry's suit. But Henry wasn't moving. His heart was no longer in sync with the rhythm of wealth and convenience that normally ruled his actions. Instead, memories he thought he had buried surged back with the storm. He saw his father's calloused hands after a long shift at the steel mill. He remembered his mother, standing in line at a food pantry, embarrassed but desperate to put bread on the table. He remembered nights when the heat was turned off in their tiny apartment, when he and his siblings had slept huddled under blankets to keep warm. That was decades ago, before Henry's relentless ambition had clawed its way into boardrooms and stock markets, before success had drowned out the echoes of poverty. He had promised himself then, never again. Never would I be weak, never would I let my family suffer as we did. But now, here was another family, or what was left of one, suffering right at his doorstep. The sight burned him. The rain pounded harder, dripping from his perfectly groomed hair despite the umbrella above him. He could smell the damp asphalt, hear the squeal of wet tires on the road, feel the weight of decision pressing against his chest. The chauffeur spoke again, breaking the silence. "Shall I take you home, Mr. Wallace?" Henry blinked, still staring at the couple. The man's lips moved faintly, whispering something to his wife that Henry couldn't hear over the rain. Her eyes were closed now, her head leaning limply against his chest. The sight stirred something deep within Henry, something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Compassion. But alongside compassion came the voice of logic, sharp and cold. They are strangers. This isn't your responsibility. You have a dinner meeting. You'll ruin your suit. You've worked hard to be above this kind of suffering. And yet, another voice whispered louder, if you turn away now, who are you really? What was the point of all your success if you can't bend down to help someone who has nothing? Henry's jaw clenched. He could feel the tension in his shoulders, the silent battle raging between pride and conscience. The chauffeur was still holding the umbrella over him. The doorman was watching nervously, wondering if he'd be scolded for not removing the couple sooner. The rain hammered down, waiting. The city bustled around them, uncaring, blind. Henry looked down at his polished shoes. Drops of water had begun to splash onto them. His entire life had been about keeping things polished, controlled, untouchable. But this moment demanded something different. His hand twitched at his side. He hadn't moved yet, but deep inside, Henry already knew, he couldn't walk away. Sparkles. This is where scene 1 ends, with Henry standing in the rain, locked in that moment of decision, caught between the man he had built himself into and the boy who once knew what it was to be cold, poor, and unseen. The decision was made in a heartbeat, though it felt like the weight of years had pressed Henry's soul before he moved. He let the chauffeur's umbrella slip aside, stepped out into the downpour, and strode toward the elderly couple. His polished leather shoes splashed through puddles, his suit instantly soaked. Gasps escaped from the doorman and driver behind him. This was not the Henry Wallace they knew, the man who avoided inconvenience at all costs. The old man stared at Henry's shadow looming over him. His face was wrinkled and gaunt, his eyes bloodshot and tired, but still sharp enough to register shock. "Yes, sir," he stammered, trying to push himself up. We'll move. Don't worry. We're not beggars. I just couldn't let her collapse." His voice cracked like brittle glass. Henry crouched down, ignoring the rain streaming down his hair, dripping into his eyes. Up close, he could see the woman's shallow breaths, the bluish tinge of her lips. She was freezing. His hand trembled as he touched her forehead, it was ice cold. "You're not beggars," Henry said firmly. "You're people. And people don't deserve to be left out here." The man's eyes filled with tears, pride and despair clashing on his face. We lost our home," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I worked all my life, but my pension barely covered medicine. When she fell ill, I sold everything to pay for treatment. We thought maybe someone would let us stay, but," his voice gave out, drowned by a violent cough. Henry felt something twist inside his chest. He could almost hear his mother's voice from long ago. "Henry, remember, money is only paper. People's lives matter more." He had buried that lesson under years of ambition. Tonight, it roared back with undeniable force. "Doorman," Henry barked, his tone cutting through the storm. "Call an ambulance, now. Not in 5 minutes. Now." The doorman scrambled to obey, fumbling for his phone. The chauffeur hesitated by the car, unsure whether to intervene or retreat. Everyone who worked for Henry was used to seeing him cold and untouchable. This raw urgency was something new. Henry slipped off his soaked coat and wrapped it around the woman. She stirred faintly, her weak voice whispering, "Thank you." It was barely audible, but to Henry it was louder than the thunder overhead. Minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced through the rain. A red and white ambulance pulled up to the curb. Paramedics rushed out, kneeling beside the couple, checking pulses, asking rapid questions. Henry stood close, answering when the old man was too weak to speak. When they lifted the woman onto the stretcher, Henry moved with them, shielding her from the rain with his own body as though she were his kin. "Sir, we'll take them to St. Mary's Hospital," one paramedic said briskly. "We'll need a family member too." "I'll come," Henry interrupted. His chauffeur blinked in shock. Henry Wallace, billionaire tycoon, climbing into an ambulance. But Henry didn't waver. He followed the stretcher inside, sitting beside the old man, whose frail hand still clutched his wife's. The ride was a blur of sirens and flashing lights. Henry sat quietly, listening to the paramedics' work, his heart pounding in rhythm with the rain. He caught the old man glancing at him once, eyes wet with gratitude, but Henry only nodded. Words felt too small for the storm inside him. At the hospital, doctors whisked the couple into emergency care. Henry didn't just sign forms, he insisted on covering every bill. Private room, he told the receptionist. Immediate treatment, whatever it costs. His credit card slid across the counter, no hesitation. Hours passed. Henry sat in the waiting room, suit still damp, hair disheveled, but he didn't care. He ignored the curious stares of nurses who recognized him from the newspapers. For once, Henry Wallace wasn't the millionaire tycoon. He was just a man waiting, hoping two strangers would live through the night. Finally, a doctor approached. "They'll be fine," she said with a tired smile. "Severe hypothermia and exhaustion, but nothing we can't treat. You got them here just in time." Relief washed through Henry, stronger than any business victory he had ever felt. He thanked the doctor, then quietly went to the couple's room. The woman was sleeping peacefully under warm blankets. The old man sat by her side, holding her hand. When he saw Henry, tears spilled down his cheeks. "Why?" he whispered hoarsely. "Why would you stop for us, sir? No one else did." Henry looked at him for a long moment. His throat felt tight, his voice rough when it came. "Because once upon a time, someone stopped for me. And I almost forgot what that meant." The old man pressed his hand over Henry's. "You saved her life tonight. God bless you." Henry stayed until dawn, making sure they were comfortable, arranging temporary housing through his staff, ordering meals and fresh clothes to be delivered daily. He gave the hospital his personal number, instructing them to call him with updates. When Henry finally stepped outside, the storm had passed. The sky was pale blue, the streets washed clean. He inhaled deeply, the crisp morning air filling his lungs. For the first time in years, he didn't feel hollow. He felt alive. News of the incident spread quickly. Reporters had caught wind of the story, "Millionaire Stops in Rain to Save Elderly Couple." Cameras wanted a statement, but Henry brushed them off. "It's not a story about me," he told them. "It's about remembering our humanity." But deep down, Henry knew the truth. It was a story about him, because in helping that couple, he had rediscovered the boy he once was, the one who understood pain, hunger, and fear, but also compassion. In the weeks that followed, Henry started a foundation dedicated to helping homeless seniors across New York. Shelters were built, medical programs funded, and safe havens created for those who had nowhere else to go. And whenever people asked what inspired him, Henry would simply smile and say, "One rainy night, I remembered what mattered most. Sparkle's moral: wealth can build towers, but compassion builds legacies. True greatness lies not in what we own, but in how we lift others when they fall."